If you have an idea for a novel and you've never written a book before, here is my #1 piece of advice for you. Write it fast. So after last week's episode about how to become a published author in 2020, I really thought a lot about what I wanted the very next episode in this series to be. I went back through old emails and notes of mine from 2007, which is when I decided to try to write a book for the first time and maybe even go for getting published. I really wanted to try to remember what my most burning questions were at the time, but also what I didn't know that I didn't know I needed to know, if that makes sense. Back then, I followed a ton of blogs by authors and literary agents and editors who were doling out really awesome, super helpful advice on writing a great book and finding an agent and getting published. The more I learned, the more questions I had, and the more I researched, and this went on and on until before I knew it, it was 2009, and you know what I still hadn't done? Write a book. I had an idea. I had such an idea. I mean, this idea was what sparked this urge and this obsessive researching to begin with. I had a vision for this book. You know what I'm talking about. These characters lived in my head for 2 years and became more real and vivid to me by the day. I drew maps and I had documents filled with world building details. I made spreadsheets to plot out not just the book, but the series because yeah, it was gonna be a fantasy series. I could see it all, the whole cast, the big plot twists, the emotional reveals so clearly. It was like a movie in my mind and it kept me up at night and distracted me to no end. Oh yeah, and I did write some of it, like maybe 5,000 words. But whenever I would actually write, the sentences came out clunky and awkward. The dialogue was so cheesy. Elements of my fantasy world that I was so in love with just suddenly seemed really derivative. This beautiful story in my mind was coming out all wrong, and I started to doubt myself. I started to doubt that this idea was even worth writing. And why? Because the story wasn't coming out of my head and onto the page flawlessly the very first time? What the hell? Looking back on it, I know it was ridiculous of me to expect that of myself. But the truth is, the combination of obsessively researching things like why agents and editors reject books and biggest mistakes first-time authors make, while educational, resulted in me picking over every sentence I wrote and second-guessing every decision I made in an attempt to make it perfect from the very start. And that resulted in me never finishing that book. When you get an idea for a novel, it's like someone lit a match inside you. And what are your options when you're holding a lit match? You can blow it out and move on. You can hold it and hold it and hold it and think about doing something with it until it burns out. Or you can use it to set some shit on fire. With that very first book idea I had, I went the second route. I let the flame burn out. And there's a reason 13 years have gone by and I haven't written that book. I remember all the details about it, but you can't relight a used match. Maybe one day I'll take bits and pieces from that idea and another spark will fly. But that story, the way it existed in my mind back then, it's never going to happen. If you have an idea for a novel and you've never written a book before, here is my #1 piece of advice for you. Write it fast. This isn't about the market or competition. I'm not saying write it now before someone else takes your idea. Nobody has your idea. This is about creating something amazing before that match burns out. Tell me if you've heard this one before. Yeah, I take my time and craft every sentence, so it takes me a while to finish a draft, but then my books are really literary. The difference between literary fiction and commercial fiction has nothing to do with how quickly the story was written. That kind of comment really got in my head early on in my career because I didn't recognize it for what it was at the time, which is just insecurity and self-defensiveness. So I really want to emphasize this point right now. Fast is relative. 6 months to a finished draft might be really fast for this author and really slow for this author. But the number 6 is irrelevant here. What matters is that this author got the story written while the match was lit, and this author is letting it burn out. So in 2014, I had another idea that really consumed me. And at this point, I had some experience. I had a few published novels under my belt already. But for some reason with this story, I made the same mistake that I made back in 2007. I researched, took notes, played around with outlines, and I did eventually finish the draft, but it took a few years. I sent it to my agent, she read it, and while she said a lot of genuinely nice things about it, ultimately it was just so big and kind of unwieldy that she felt it almost certainly wouldn't sell unless I did some serious ground up work. I'm talking like total rewrite. And by that time, I was so exhausted from spending years on this story that I just couldn't bring myself to do it again. In contrast, in 2016, I had another idea for a book that I was really excited about, and I wrote it in 5 weeks. That book received the best reviews and recognition of any of my novels to date. Obviously, 5 weeks was just to the first draft. There was a lot of revision to be done, but that's why I'm telling you to write this fast, because you will always revise. Revision is a non-negotiable part of being an author. So who cares if your first draft is full of plot holes or typos or whatever? That is fixable. The point of a first draft is to capture that passion and get it onto the page. The one thing you can't edit for is a lack of passion. So again, I respect the fact that every writer works at a different pace, which is why there's no number in the title of this video. I'm not telling you to write your book in 3 weeks or 2 months or 94 days or whatever. I'm not defining fast because only you can define your fast. What I am telling you is that if you have that little flame inside of you right now, you need to do whatever you can to turn it into a wildfire as fast as possible. Okay, Michelle, that's all well and good, but I've never written a book before, so how the hell am I supposed to write one fast? Here's how. 1. Go easy on the writing and publishing advice. I'm not telling you to avoid it altogether. Obviously, there is real value in educating yourself. And I know for me, watching writing craft videos and reading writing craft blog posts and articles usually ends up just motivating me to write. So definitely do it if it motivates you. But if you've never written a book before and you really start to consume all of these lists of really bad cliches and things readers are so over, things editors really hate, reasons they reject manuscripts, that stuff can really get inside your head. Criticism of books is great and necessary, but not before you've even written the thing. Also, the best way to improve as a writer isn't to read about all of the mistakes writers make. It's to write and make some mistakes and learn from them. 2. Design a flexible writing routine. I've harped on this in previous videos, and there's a reason for it. I really don't want you to take write your book fast to mean write every single day as many words as you can until it's done. No, please don't do that. That is the road to burnout. I know this sort of conventional wisdom for authors who are just starting out is to carve out a very specific time of day and preferably in a specific place and to really get in the mindset of this is my writing time. And that's a really good advice and that might work for a lot of people. But I think your routine is going to be a lot easier to stick to if you give yourself options. So instead of saying, I'm going to wake up every morning and after breakfast, I'm going to write 2,000 words. Try this. Give yourself 3 to 4 options. The night before, maybe even write them down. So for example, 1, write 1,500 words. 2, do some brainstorming for the next chapter. 3, do a little world building research. 4, daydreaming. Yes. Daydreaming is actually considered work when you're an author. Isn't that cool? In all seriousness, there are going to be days when you wake up and daydreaming is the only option you're going to want to go for. And that's okay. Listen to what your brain is telling you. Giving the story time to turn over and develop in your mind is really key to not letting that match burn out. And giving yourself a choice every morning when you wake up of what you're going to do to work on your book that day really kind of like rewires your brain and helps you tackle it with a more positive attitude. You don't have to sit down and write 1,000 words. You are choosing to sit down and write 1,000 words. 3, don't force the words out. Obviously, you're going to have to choose to draft on a lot of those days if you actually want to get a draft. But when you sit down in front of your laptop and you just, with every fiber of your being, do not want to write during this session, don't force it. Instead, close your laptop and tell yourself that not only are you not allowed to write for the rest of the day, you are not allowed to write tomorrow either, no matter what. Because if you do, you are risking getting sick of this idea, second guessing this idea, and letting the match burn out. And then, and this is really key, you have to stick to it. By the time this self-imposed moratorium is over, you are going to be itching to get back to writing that draft. 4, and most importantly, when that little voice starts whispering in your mind that your idea is stupid, tell it to off. The more you write your story and the more real your book becomes, the louder that voice tends to get. But I promise you that voice is wrong, and I am not just saying that to be motivational. Think about the weirdest book, movie, or show that you've ever watched or read. And I mean weird in a bad way, like weird in a who signed off on this kind of way. That idea got published or produced. And what's more, if you go digging around online, you will find a fan base for that thing. It might be a really small fan base, but they're out there. That book, that show, that movie that you think is just so stupid and never should have gotten made, there are people out there who love it. Your readers, the ones who are going to love your idea, they're out there too. They're your fans. They just don't know it yet. So yeah, when I think back to 2007 Michelle, this is the one piece of advice I would give her. Write that book fast, because man, I would really love to know how that would have turned out. Your idea is awesome. So take that match and go set some fires. Don't forget to check out my playlist, How to Become a Published Author in 2020, for more of these videos coming up in the future. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications every time I post a new video. And I'll see you next week.